The question of who is the greatest lightsaber duelist in Star Wars history is one of the hardest to answer. Across thousands of years, the galaxy has produced fighters so unique that comparing them directly almost feels impossible. Take Exar Kun. Kun elevated the balanced style of Nine-Man beyond anything the Order had ever seen. The form was supposed to be the jack-of-all-trades style, never the top dueling form, but Exar drove every element to its absolute peak, blending them all seamlessly. And then he added trickery, altering the length of his lightsaber mid-combat to disorient even masters. He wasn't just skilled, he was manipulative, deceptive, and unpredictable. Then there is Tulak Hord, the dark warlord whose very name carried inevitability. Tulak never lost. His apprentice was so afraid to face him openly that he murdered him in a betrayal rather than risk a duel. To face Tulak was to accept death. His reputation was not cleverness, it was inevitability. This is why there is no one definitive answer to the GOAT question. How do you weigh Exar Kun's layered creativity against Tulak's absolute dominance? How do you measure them against Yoda's centuries of refinement, Mace Windu's creation of Vapad, Dooku's Makashi, or Sidious's deceptive mastery? This is why the series doesn't crown one champion, it simply makes the case. And today, we will be making the case for the chosen one, Anakin Skywalker. Anakin is unlike any of them. Not a duelist of long reign like Tulak, not a sorcerer swordsman like Exar, not a monk like Yoda or a purist like Dooku. Anakin Skywalker was a product of war. A man obsessed with the blade, whose instincts were unrivaled, forged in the Clone Wars crucible, and revealed on Mustafar as the warrior who grew stronger the longer the fight went on. But his case is also a tragic one. His prime did not last years, it did not last months, it lasted days. And yet in those days, he may have shown us the most dangerous peak of any duelist in galactic history. Today, we will be looking at Anakin Skywalker and presenting his case as the greatest lightsaber duelist of all time. From the very first time he held a lightsaber, Anakin was transfixed. The mechanics, the balance, the grip, the rhythm, it made sense instantly. The Kyber crystal felt more than a weapon. To Anakin, this was the bond with the Force, his promise as a Jedi Guardian to protect all that he loved. Even as a Padawan, his talent was undeniable. He didn't just outclass other students, he was already besting Jedi Knights. Masters would whisper about him. Though Yoda and Windu were considered the paragons of dueling in this era, there were hushed acknowledgments that Anakin could be something more, something different. That he may already be the Order's greatest warrior in raw ability. And the lineage of his training mattered. His first inspiration was Qui-Gon Jinn. Qui-Gon's form was aggressive, improvisational. Form 4 Ataru defined his style. When Qui-Gon Jinn fell in combat, Anakin was trained by Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan, who had also begun his life as an Ataru specialist before later entirely devoting himself to Surisu. Obi-Wan passed down what he knew best at the time, so Anakin grew up steeped in Ataru's leaping strikes, spinning momentum, and the reckless forward drive. Ataru was perfect for a gifted athletic prodigy like Anakin. It played on his instincts, but it also set him up for the most important lesson of his life. Because on Geonosis, Anakin would learn what it meant to be humbled by the blade. Unlike Darth Tyrannus Dooku, who polished Makashi through decades of sparring, Anakin's lightsaber was forged in real battle. The Clone Wars threw him into thousands of fights. Dark Jedi assassins, separatist champions, Sith cultists, bounty hunters trained to kill Jedi. Among them was Ventress, handpicked by Dooku, but ultimately a creation of Sidious's long game, his vision for Anakin. The point cannot be overstated. Sidious deliberately introduced Ventress into the war just as he had unleashed Dooku himself. Both were tailored to push Anakin Skywalker to his limit. Ventress was meant to goad him into anger, to test his restraint. Dooku was meant to remind him of his humiliation, to keep the boy chasing perfection until the day where he would finally surpass his old master's master. Darth Sidious was not simply waging a war of conquest, he was cultivating something greater, a weapon. Every duel, every trial was arranged to harden Anakin, to shape him into the storm that would one day replace Dooku, and even Sidious himself. And with each duel, Anakin learned a terrible truth. When he leaned into anger, he won. When he gave into fear, his strikes became sharper, his speed faster, his power heavier. The Jedi saw it, they worried, but they also praised him as a hero. The Republic called him the hero with no fear, a great irony. Two duels proved this transformation beyond a doubt. On Yavin 4, when dueling Ventress, Anakin's anger escalated his performance until she could no longer stand against him. And during Operation Nightfall, the Jedi Temple Purge, Anakin Skywalker would cut down the Jedi Battlemaster of that era, a man who had mastered all 6 previous forms of lightsaber combat in Sindralig, and Anakin would do it with great ease. The Clone Wars did not just sharpen Anakin Skywalker. They revealed that war itself had become his element. Skywalker's journey to greatness can be traced through the evolution of his form. He began with Ataru, inspired by Qui-Gon, taught by Obi-Wan. Anakin initially thrived in the acrobatics and the forward aggression of the form, but when he faced Dooku on Geonosis, Ataru's flaws were laid bare. Dooku was Form 2 incarnate. Where Ataru thrived on flourishing offense, Makashi thrived on conserving motion. On Geonosis, Anakin's leaping spins and forward rushes were dissected with ease. Dooku punished every wasted flourish, redirected every wide arc, and humiliated the young Jedi. This was Anakin's fulcrum moment, the moment where Anakin turned from gifted to obsessed. Skywalker would not allow himself to be embarrassed so easily. He rebuilt himself around a new form, Djem So, the dueling branch of Form 5. Where Ataru flowed like wind, Djem So struck like lightning. It emphasized dominance, raw power, seizing the initiative. It was everything that Ataru was not, and Anakin poured every bit of himself into it. But he never abandoned Ataru entirely. Anakin was a genius. He fused its agility into the new foundation, creating a hybrid style that corrected Djem So's rooted weaknesses. What emerged was terrifying, a style that would press like an avalanche but adjust like lightning. The evolution is reflected in the weapon that Anakin built. At the onset of the Clone Wars, Anakin forged the lightsaber that he would carry into Mustafar. Unlike Exar Kun's lightsaber, which could change blade length or deactivate mid-duel to confuse enemies, Anakin's blade was not built for trickery. This was a soldier's lightsaber, straightforward, reliable, designed for utility and for war. In contrast to Dooku's refinement fencing foil, Anakin's weapon was a hammer, suited to the brutal battlefields of the Republic's war, and Anakin used it for this purpose. He didn't fight in tournaments, in halls. He fought in trenches, hangars, and jungles. Hundreds of times he entered combat against droids, soldiers, assassins, and lightsaber wielders alike. Anakin was not practicing theory of the lightsaber. He was surviving. Every strike he threw was proven in life and in death. Yet, what set Anakin apart was not only his war hardening, but his obsession with flawless victory. To Anakin, every soldier lost under his command was a personal failure. Winning was never enough. Anakin had to win perfectly. And when he didn't, when lives were lost, it ate at him. His psychology was scarred by the expectation of this perfection, and this seed of fear, pride, and self-doubt would one day betray him. This is where Anakin's uniqueness must be understood. He was not just talented, he was the chosen one. His midichlorian count was the highest in recorded history. His ceiling was not speculation, it was confirmed. Even if he reached only a fraction of it, he was destined to stand above every other Force sensitive in history. And in lightsaber combat, the arena he had chosen, this was no exception. Years later on the Invisible Hand, Dooku entered the duel confident. He had defeated Anakin before, and Sidious told him that this was simply another test. But what followed was not a test, it was a dismantling. Makashi's elegance collapsed under Anakin's relentless hybrid storm. Dooku's parries no longer drained enough power. His footwork was smothered by Anakin's mobility. Within moments, Dooku was on his knees, disarmed and defenseless. This matters because Dooku was still one of the greatest duelists of this era. He had sparred with Yoda, he had humiliated Obi-Wan, he stood as Makashi's last living master. And Anakin didn't just beat him, he humiliated him. For Sidious, this was the culmination of years of manipulation. He had groomed Anakin through war, and now in a single duel, the old aristocracy fell to the storm that he had created. His brilliance as a duelist came not just from raw aggression, but the way he fused these forms that were traditionally at odds with one another. Ataru thrived on overwhelming acrobatics and an explosive offense, but it burned out through stamina and left the user vulnerable to counters, especially if the opponent could weather the storm. Djem So, on the other hand, excelled in power strikes, relentless counters, but it risked stagnation when facing faster duelists, those that could drag the duel into attrition. Most Jedi and Sith could master one or the other, but balancing them together usually led to disaster. Anakin alone managed to weave them seamlessly. his Ataru burst breaking defenses wide open, Djem So following through, punishing any attempt at retaliation. In Anakin's hands, the weaknesses of each style didn't just cancel out, they became strengths. For 99.9% of all individuals in Star Wars lore, even the most gifted, this would be impossible. But it was possible through Anakin's superhuman stamina, fueled by valor at a scale that could not be comprehended. Most would exhaust themselves within minutes attempting such a blend, but Anakin fought as though fatigue simply did not exist. His body was a furnace for the Force, driving his movements at a pace and intensity that shredded opposition before they could ever hope to adapt. Where another warrior may hesitate to expend themselves too quickly, Anakin could pour everything into every strike, every leap, every counter, knowing that his stamina would never fail. This was not simple mastery of two forms, it was the creation of something new, born from sheer physical dominance and force-enhanced vitality so extreme that it allowed him to transcend the limits that defined the greatest duelist before him. Count Dooku had dismantled Anakin's Ataru with precision, exploiting the gaps left by his acrobatic spins and his wide flourishes. Where Anakin sought to overwhelm, Dooku's Makashi thrived on slipping into the space left behind, carving into his guard with surgical efficiency. But when Skywalker began integrating Djem So, the battlefield shifted completely. Its power-based angles forced Dooku's blade into predictable lines, and every time the Count attempted to sidestep, redirect, or to pull the momentum back into his control, Anakin was there, cutting off the escape route with brutal precision. What had once been a duel of finesse became a suffocating grind of strength and inevitability. By closing the angles and eliminating Dooku's freedom of movement, Anakin forced the Elder Sith to meet him head-on, where every blow rained on Dooku and seemed to age him a decade. Count Dooku was not just simply outdueled, he was smothered, consumed, and overrun. But then came Mustafar. Obi-Wan Kenobi was the greatest master of Surisu in Jedi history. His entire career was built on defense. Surisu was patience turned into a wall, a style that promised any storm would eventually burn itself out, and that the tide would pass. Obi-Wan proved this. Just like Anakin, this was not theory. He survived Maul. He endured Dooku's Makashi long enough to survive. His most miraculous feat of endurance was against Grievous, whose mechanical stamina and whirling arms had overwhelmed Jedi across the galaxy for the entire war. Obi-Wan's mastery of Surisu allowed him to outlast even that storm, until the moment arrived to end the duel. Surisu was the wall that no force could break. But against Anakin Skywalker, even the greatest wall in Jedi history was still not enough. The Revenge of the Sith novelization reveals Obi-Wan's horror. On Mustafar, Obi-Wan noted something terrifying. Anakin was not tiring, he was getting stronger as the duel progressed. Every clash made his strikes heavier, every exchange made him faster. Anakin was the Hulk of lightsaber combat. The longer the fight went on, the more unstoppable he became. He was escalation itself, a storm that only intensified with time. And that is why Surisu failed. Its entire philosophy was to wait out the storm, to absorb the fury until it passed. But against Anakin, there was no storm to wait out. Obi-Wan was staring into a duel with no ceiling. So he did the unthinkable. Obi-Wan Kenobi abandoned Surisu. Kenobi stopped relying on the wall of defense and relied instead on psychology. He baited Anakin, exploiting his pride and his impulsiveness, and he ended the duel not through the blade, but through Anakin's own overconfidence. This is what makes Mustafar haunting, not because Anakin was defeated, but because before he defeated Surisu at its pinnacle. Looming over it all was Sidious, the Dark Lord of the Sith who built a religion around self-worship, admitted that Anakin would surpass him. Sith ideology demanded self-deification, and for Sidious to acknowledge Anakin's potential exceeded his own was an extraordinary statement. It meant that even within the creed that worshipped power, Anakin was beyond even them. But as we do with every GOAT video, we must now present a piece of the counter-argument. Anakin's case cannot ignore the truth. He lost. Obi-Wan defeated him. But it was not a clean better swordsman wins. Obi-Wan did not break him with patience or endurance. He broke him with familiarity, with psychology, and with terrain. This is where the teachings of the Sith provide context. Darth Bane, the father of the Rule of Two, taught his apprentice Darth Zana to wield Surisu as the ultimate weapon. Bane instructed her to endure, to outlast, to wait until her enemies grew tired and revealed an opening. For Zana, this philosophy was survival. But Obi-Wan was not just a practitioner. He perfected Surisu beyond anything Zana or any other Jedi could ever hope to achieve. Obi-Wan became the undisputed master of the form in all of galactic history, and Anakin Skywalker broke that form. He didn't just withstand the greatest defense ever forged, he forced Obi-Wan to abandon it, to set aside the very essence of Surisu because endurance against Anakin was impossible. Yet Obi-Wan knew Anakin better than anyone. He knew the psychology that lay beneath the perfect storm. He knew that pride and recklessness could be baited, and that if Anakin was dared to attempt the same maneuver that Obi-Wan once used against Maul on Naboo, his arrogance would drive him into disaster. Without that moment, without that psychological exploitation, the duel, and perhaps the entire GOAT debate, would have ended completely differently. If not for Anakin's flaws, Obi-Wan's fate on Mustafar was sealed, as was the case for the GOAT. This is Anakin's weakness, not that he lacked skill, dedication, or even control of the duel, but that his own mind betrayed him. His psychology was the only thing that could be turned against him here. Against another opponent, one without Obi-Wan's intimate knowledge, the storm may have remained unstoppable. So let's look at Anakin's competition, how he stacks up to the rest of the GOATs. Tulak, Hord, and Anakin represent two of the most terrifying philosophies of the lightsaber. Tulak Hord was inevitable as well. His dueling legacy was not about deception or artistry, it was certainty. His apprentice refused to face him openly, choosing betrayal instead of a duel. To fight Tulak was to accept your death in advance. Inevitability was his myth, his aura, his reality. Anakin Skywalker was escalation. He was not inevitability at the opening of the duel, but he became inevitability as the fight dragged on. Every strike heavier, every clash faster, every moment more dangerous than the last. He was the Hulk of lightsaber combat, a warrior who broke the very idea of endurance. And this is where the comparison crystallizes. Tulak's opponents surrendered to inevitability before they raised their blades. Anakin's opponents surrendered in the middle of the duel, realizing there was no point at which his strength would ever plateau. The key to defeating Tulak was never to face him at all. The key to defeating Anakin was never to try and outlast him. That was impossible. This is what makes Mustafar so interesting. Obi-Wan, the greatest Surisu master in history, did not beat Anakin through endurance. He only survived by abandoning Surisu, by preying on pride and exploiting Anakin's psychology. Even Surisu perfected, the very philosophy Bane handed to Zana as survival itself. It collapsed before Anakin and before escalation. Tulak Hord was inevitability. Anakin was escalation. And when escalation grows without limit, no wall will hold forever. Anakin Skywalker was 23 years old on Mustafar. He should have had decades ahead of him, decades to evolve, to hybridize further, to possibly invent a new form of lightsaber combat that would stand apart from all others. Anakin was really the only one that could achieve this, but instead, his prime was narrow. It lasted hours, and yet in those hours and days, he humiliated Dooku. He forced Obi-Wan to abandon Surisu. He terrified the Council. And Sidious himself admitted that Anakin would one day grow beyond even him. The haunting truth is that Anakin was always evolving. Every loss reshaped him. Every duel rebuilt him. Every failure created a stronger version of his form. If he had not fallen, he would have surpassed every philosophy, every form, and he would have created something beyond the 7 lightsaber traditions. The myth of Anakin Skywalker is the myth of unfinished greatness, the duel that never truly happened. The haunting question, what if Mustafar had not cut him down? Anakin Skywalker's case as the GOAT duelist is both overwhelming and a tragic one. His obsession with the lightsaber, his warforged growth, his perfected hybridized style, his humiliation of Dooku, his breaking of Surisu, his weapon built not for deception, but for war. Yes, he had flaws, his pride, his psychology, his tragically brief prime, but even those flaws could not hide what he was. A storm that only grew the longer that it raged. A storm that the galaxy had not seen before, and has not been seen since. For a handful of days, the galaxy glimpsed it. They saw a warrior who humiliated one of the greatest duelists alive, who broke the greatest Jedi defense in history, and who may have been destined to outstrip every master who ever lived. It would never happen, but for a moment in time, Anakin was the single most dangerous duelist that the galaxy had ever seen. And so, my friends, this was Anakin Skywalker. This was his case for the GOAT, the greatest duelist in all of Star Wars lore. But now, my friends, the verdict belongs to you. Was Anakin Skywalker the greatest duelist of all time? Or would he ultimately be embarrassed and humiliated in turn by Tulak, Exar, others that we will continue to document? And now it is your turn. Who, in your opinion, is the GOAT? As always, thank you so much for watching, and may the Force be with you.